you might be able to direct them to other places. So Kieran has brought books if anybody is interested, books are very interesting. I'll have some of it read, not the whole lot of it. And find out more about English history today. In the last couple of days, we've got to do it from school books. So I'm going to go to Kieran and Kieran Quaker.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I'll explain first of all a little bit how I came into this story, because I can't believe you don't write a book. I think the book writes you. What I mean by that is that little things happen in your life. Things stick in your mind. Little connections are made. The questions you ask, the information that you actually, the way you present it, that's all a reflection of you, a reflection on you. And therefore, as you read a book, you get to know the author. And unfortunately, if you read my book, you're going to get to know a little bit about me. For example, I do a bit of cycling. Now, this is Monument Valley in Utah, and in 2011, I was taking part in a race called the Race Across America. And it's a 3,000-mile cycle from California to New York, from ocean to ocean. By the way, don't think I'm a great cyclist, I'm not. There was, I take any of the medals I won, I was part of a team. There was a team of 8 of us, and our race was to cross America in 7 days, averaging 400 miles a day. That was the idea, and we did it. But as you're going through America, you're going through lots of these tiny little towns. Most of them you don't remember. But one of them, this little one here, it just stuck in my mind because there was something strange about the town. At the end of the town was called Hope. There was a little sign saying, "You are now beyond hope." I said, okay, I liked it, you see. And so I came back, I was living in Youghal, and I started doing a diploma in genealogy. And that took me up to 2013. I needed a project to complete my diploma. And I'm part of a history group down there, and every year we do a conference. And the 2014 conference was going to be all about the Quakers. And so to help the conference, I do something like Anne-Marie does. I was putting up little anecdotes about the Quakers on Facebook to generate interest. And one of them I put up was about a man called James Cotter, who was hanged in 1720 for raping a woman. And the Quakers were blamed, but they had nothing to do with it. So I said, okay, just put it up. It's a random piece of information. But a few weeks later, I happened to be in Middleton. My brother was home from England. I brought him to the distillery, do the tour, and taste the goods. And I met 2 Americans, and I said, "Where are you from?" They said, "We're from Hope." And I said, "Oh my God, I know your town. It's a great town. And I love the sign." And I said, "What do you do in Ireland?" And they said, "We're researching our ancestors. One of them was hanged for being a Catholic." And I said, "That's very strange. What was his name?" They said, "James Cotter." And suddenly the brain started to click around, and I said, "Are we talking James Cotter carried through in 1720? And they said, "Yeah, that's the guy. Do you know him?" And I said, No, I said, "He wasn't hanged for being a Catholic. He was hanged for rape." And suddenly the faces dropped. And also my face dropped because I suddenly realized I knew nothing about James Cotter other than that particular fact. I also promised that there and then I'd find out what I could about James Cotter. My primary discipline would have been history, so I began to look through the history books. And there is a story about doctors differ and patients die. There should be something similar about historians. Historians' different versions lie. The first one I read was Atkinson, and he talks about Cotter being a flamboyant scapegrace, a member of the Hellfire Club, a thoroughly nasty piece of work, a lawyer's nightmare. Now, if you're like me and you check things out, and I do, the Hellfire Club was formed in 1735. Cotter was hanged in 1720. He cannot have been a member. Can't be. So you say to yourself, how in the name of God does this man get things so far wrong? Well, basically he read another historian. Now the other historian is a man called Neil Garman. And Neil Garnham has a lovely article. He compares the trial of Baron Santry with the trial of James Cotter. Santry is a baron. He has an argument with his manservant, takes out his sword and runs him through. The man dies, he's on trial for murder. Okay, and Santry was supposed to have been a member of the Hellfire Club, a complete waster. But if you look at it very carefully, he's not saying he was, he's saying Santry was a supposed member. And suddenly what's happening is you go from a supposed member to being an actual member. And suddenly again your antenna sharpen and you look at the other references in the history books and you find incredible anomalies. John Windale, one of our great Cork historians, says he was executed for rape in 1688. He wasn't even born in 1688. Okay? O'Crieve says he was executed for an alleged rape. Okay? The next one, Lecky. There are two major historians of the 18th century, Lecky and Froude. Lecky thinks that Cotter abducted this young woman and that she was a Quaker. Now, here in Cork we have a fabulous abduction story which still is awaiting someone to write it up. There was a girl called Mary Pike. Her family home was Besborough, the mother and child home, 55 acres of grounds, incredibly wealthy family. Her father dies, leaving her all the bobs. Over on the other side of the city, we have a man called Henry Brown Hayes. He's married to a girl from Youghal. She dies. He has 4 children with her and a couple of others at the side, but he decides the best way to sort out his money problems would be to kidnap a wealthy young girl, force her to marry him, and suddenly all his financial problems are solved. Now, this Mary Pike was staying with her uncle, Cooper Penrose. If you go into the Crawford Art Gallery, you'll see the Cooper Penrose art collection. Or if you are there across the river from the bus station, you'll see Penrose Quay. This is the Penrose we're talking about. She was with him, again, knocked on the door. Her mother was dying, please come home. And she heads off down to Blackrock, but on the way she's kidnapped and brought off to Henry Brown Hayes' house in Vernon Mount. Some of you might be passing it on your way home. Vernon Mount. Okay, there he attempts to force her to marry him, and she refuses. He then drags her upstairs and attempts to have his wicked way, but unfortunately this is pre-Viagra days and nothing happened. By then, anyway, the uncle had figured out what had happened, and the uncle had a posse, and they rescued the girl. Now the girl made an absolutely appalling mistake. She told the law, she swore on the Bible, her testimony. She was a Quaker, she was thrown out. She suffered a nervous breakdown and ended her life in a mental hospital. The Quakers totally and utterly would not accept anyone to take an oath in court. That's Mary Pike. There was a song about it at the time called Merrily Kissed the Quaker. You may know the song. That's an abduction. This is nothing like that story, other than that our friend James Cotter also was a married man with 4 children, but he was wealthy. Okay, now our next big person to write on is Froude. And he gets the year wrong. He says 1719. He says he carried off, again, violated the daughter of a Quaker merchant. Her name was Elizabeth Squibb, and the details of the adventure have so far not been discovered. So this is 100 years after the event. Nobody knows what happened, but Froude says he definitely was guilty, which is lovely. No, but half the historians reckon that it was judicial murder, including the Quakers believe it was judicial murder. And equally, half of them would reckon it's not judicial murder. Interesting, it gets more interesting. Then every single living person involved in the story, other than the Quakers themselves, say she was a Quaker. The Quakers say absolutely no way was she a Quaker. The Quakers paid for the prosecution. They paid vast sums of money for the prosecution. But Richard Harrison, who's the major expert on the Quakers of Cork in particular, says there's absolutely no evidence in any Quaker book that they took any action at all in relation to events. O'Murrochú may not have used a dictionary because he called Sir James Cotter a regicide. Whatever he was not a regicide. he went out to kill regicides. That doesn't make him a regicide. Mary Leland reckons it's one of the most celebrated injustices of East Cork's history. Doyle and Connolly both say that she was his mistress, which is very, very likely. Arthur St. Ledger goes further and says they had a son. Who's Arthur St. Ledger? Well, Arthur St. Ledger is the famous man whose daughter hid inside the clock and during a Freemason meeting and became one of the first women Freemasons. But he's a man who visited Cotter in jail and who wrote a number of letters on his behalf. And Cullen has an incredible comment. He says it's the single most important trial in the entire British Isles in the first half of the 18th century. That's a really strong statement. The single most important trial. So, if you had only read one of those their accounts, you'd be quite confused about it. So the question is, how do you actually find out about somebody who dies in 1720? How do you get at the nitty-gritty? Well, in this case, the Quakers have fabulous records. We can see them in Cork, in the archives in Blackpool. Alan Broderick, who's the Lord Chief Justice of Ireland, he wrote several letters, fabulous correspondence available. James Cotter's papers are available, Arthur St. Ledger's papers, loads of newspaper accounts. Jonathan Swift had never before, my particular book, been associated with the story. I'm suggesting Jonathan Swift specifically was writing about the story. And there are lots more possible. But with this story, there are 300 years and nobody's tackled it. There's dozens of more things you could find out about it. Okay. But it all starts here. In January 1649, King Charles gets executed. Up on the scaffold, there are three guys in the silver boots. There are three colonels, Hunks, Hacker and Fair. We have the two executioners and with the poor king. And lots of people caught up in that are caught up in our story, which is amazing. And I'll come to them bit by bit. But that event, when King Charles is executed, his son, Charles II, promises he's going to track down every single one who's involved in the execution and he's going to get them. And that is the single biggest motivation behind our story tonight. Okay, the Cotter family, we can see this family tree more or less. We have James Cotter here. He marries Ellen Plunkett. Who's Ellen Plunkett? Well, she's the daughter of Lord Louth, first cousin of a man called Oliver Plunkett, that many of you will know about. Okay, he has a son, James. James is the man who's been hanged. He marries Margaret Matthew. Who's Margaret Matthew? Margaret Matthew is one of the very famous family in Cork. Her sister Anne Matthew married Gareth Nagle. They have a little child called Nano Nagle. Okay? And her first cousin, George Matthew, is the grandfather of Father Matthew, the statue you see in Patrick Street. And our friend James here, his sister was Richard Burke, whose son is Edmund Burke, you would see outside Trinity College. This is an incredibly important family. And we'll take a little bit about it. Now, going back to our King Charles, well, one of the people involved in the judging of King Charles was a fellow called John Lyle. And when King Charles II became king, he rounded up everybody he could and put them on trial. Everybody he could who was involved in the execution. And one of the guys was some of them fled to America, to Switzerland, to France, to the Netherlands, anywhere they could escape. So King Charles II organized elite squads of soldiers to track these guys down. And one of his squads of soldiers was led by a man called James Cotter. He's the elder man, the father of our person. So he is sent to Switzerland and he assassinates John Lyle in Switzerland. By the way, John Lyle's wife comes back to England a few years later. She's put on trial for treason and she too is executed. But how this impacts on our story is that their granddaughter marries the Duke of Bolton, who's the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland at the time of the trial. So Cotter's hope of a pardon is just gone. He has no hope whatsoever. Cotter is sent back to Switzerland to assassinate Edmund Ludlow. He doesn't succeed. Ludlow gets a tip-off, and the really strange, curious thing again now, Ludlow's granddaughter marries Cotter's grandson. Great things turn around. Okay, in the War Between the Two Kings, this we're talking about the Battle of the Boyne. We have James Cotter is governor of Cork, the city also represented in Parliament, and he was knighted. He becomes Sir James Cotter. And because of his services to the king, this time Charles is now dead and his brother James has taken over. James specifies that this man be allowed to keep his lands in the Treaty of Limerick. So he gets to keep his land. Okay, so what happens then is that in 1705, at the tender age of 15, James Cotter inherits everything. His father dies. Now, there's a huge amount of stuff about James Cotter. There was a book written for him specifically as a child. It's called The Parliament of Women, where he was going to learn about the wisdom of the world from 500 of the wisest women of the world. He didn't take all the lessons properly, probably. His nanny was actually a poet, and her book of poems is available. He loved white. The Jacobite colour was white. You think of William of Orange, but the Jacobites were white. Okay. He was very active politically for a number of years, taking part in riots, and he flaunted the laws. He knows the law inside out, and unfortunately he had a huge eye for the women, and lots of conquests, including, it is alleged, the wife of the judge that was going to try him a few years later. Okay, now Alan Broderick. This is his house, it's still there, this is what you see today in Middleton. On the Cork side of Middleton, just before you enter the town, it's there. He becomes almost like James Cotter in that he's an MP for Cork, Speaker of the House of Commons, and Lord Chancellor. But from our point of view, he wrote thousands of letters, and they're all available, which is fabulous. So if you're researching, this is wonderful. A wonderfully astute brain, but he absolutely hates papists. Hates papists. Okay. His son is the trial judge. St. John Broderick is the trial judge. Okay. Now there's a Quaker merchant mentioned. This is a guy called Edward Fenn. For those of you who know Cork City, Fenn's Quay is behind the courthouse. This is the guy we're talking about. So, Edward Fenn married a girl called Sarah. She was a widow of William Fennel. He died in 1698, but she's the granddaughter of Colonel Robert Fair, one of those three colonels we saw on the scaffold. Very definitely, strongly Quaker. Now, the girl Fennel, she was the granddaughter. Robert Fair's daughter married a man called Gamble, and George Gamble is the man who gave the land on which the present-day Quaker meeting house in Cork was built. It was given by George Gamble. Very strong Quaker family. So, who was Elizabeth Squibb? This is the girl involved in the story. Now, there aren't many Squibbs available to us, but the most likely candidate is a Colonel John Squibb. Why? Well, John and Anne Seymour married. They had 5 children: John, Robert, Arthur, Lawrence, and Judith. John had an estate in Castle Grace, in what's the beautiful name, Barony of Iffy and Uffa. Arthur had land in Meath. Robert's going to die in 1694. It's very awkward. John and Lawrence, both of them, have a daughter called Elizabeth in the same year. Really awkward. Okay, now, near, in the same barony of Iffy and Uffa, there's a Godfrey family. And the Godfrey family have 6 children. And we see that one of them actually marries a man called Squibb. You cannot make out the name on the will extracts. I can't make out the name. But this Godfrey person, her brother, she's née Fennel, they're a really strong Quaker family. And her brother marries this girl called Sarah Gamble. And when she died, then the girl married Edward Fenn. Now, when we go through here, I can see that these are the Beth and Wood extracts. We can see the children of the Godfreys, but I can't make out the name other than one of them married a squib, and there was one child in that marriage, a child called Elizabeth. In the Irish Roots section, we also have this Godfrey family of Knockgraffin, and again we have, go back here now, Elizabeth Squibb is here. So she's mentioned, we're fairly certain that she is. But unfortunately, by the way, this is the barony of Biffa and Offa, and here we have Shamraheen, Colonel John Squibb. Up there's a George Matthews living. We'll come back to him later on. Shamraheen Castle Grace is there. Now, when we look at the baptism certs, we find that Elizabeth, daughter of Lawrence Squibb, is born, but the critical word that we see here is the word baptized. That tells us straight away she wasn't a Quaker. Quakers don't do baptisms. Okay, there are two other Elizabeth Squibbs actually. We have Elizabeth, the daughter of William Squibb, and we have Elizabeth, daughter of John. And so also Elizabeth Squibb, the daughter of John, baptized. So John Squibb's children are baptized. And I think it's John. Okay. The next thing we come to is maybe just what is supposed to have happened. Now, we're told, the court was told that she met him in Kilworth, and James Cotter promised to accompany her to Cork. Now, when I'm looking at that, they stop off in Fermoy. They have a couple of bottles of wine in Fermoy. About a mile outside Fermoy, there's a place called Duntahane Road. I don't know. Duntahane Road. Anyway, she gets off the horse there and she gets sick. By the way, she's riding pillion with a manservant, and I'll come to that in a moment. It's a very strange way of travelling for a girl in those days. Now, my brain does strange things, and I can't help that. 27 miles is about a modern marathon. Okay? Now, I do small bit of cycling, I do a small bit of running. I do a 10k 6-mile run every now and then. And I aim to bring it in around 55 minutes. About that kind of, that's my time. Okay? Unfortunately, as I get older, I'm not jogging, I'm jogging at this stage. But the point is, if I was doing a marathon, I'd be aiming somewhere between 4 and 5 hours. Nothing crazy, just 4 to 5 hours. Would you all accept that? The walking pace, by the way, is 15 minutes per mile, so 4 miles a minute, 4 miles an hour is the walking pace. But Elizabeth Squibb is counting on 2 days to get to Cork. 2 days. At a time when girls are being kidnapped, at a time when girls are at risk. 2 days and there's nobody asking questions. To me, very strange. So I began to look for images of girls riding pillion. The only one I could find that was anywhere reasonable that I could show you is this one. And it's sort of a cartoon. It was highly improper for a girl to ride pillion. Girls rode side saddle in those days, not pillion. But Cotter specifically says she was riding pillion behind a man. It's strange. Because the newspaper accounts also talk about people not liking people of Mrs. Squibb's profession. It suggests something else to us. Okay. Now, in Fermoy, in 1720, Fermoy is in the town today. It wasn't on the main road to Cork. It's a one tiny pub, few houses. But it was a place where young men would go to meet young women. And we have a lovely Irish poem of the time, and I've translated it. One day in Fermoy I was alone in a tavern, with whiskey on the table before me, without distraction, when I spied a fine, gentle, affable, graceful girl standing blankly in the street by the house. Without delay I quickly jumped from the table where I was sitting, and I ran to the street towards the girl I mentioned. And then I inquired of the girl, of the fair curling hair, was she one of the tribe of strolling pleasure seekers? I banged on the table and loudly called for wine, and the poem was the bit was like the 7 drunk nights. I can't go on because they head upstairs after a little while. But you get the idea about Mrs. Barry's Inn in Fermoy. It was a place where a young woman might well be scandalised. Okay. I want you to remember the word scandalised because it is a very important word in our story. Now, I told you that the Duntahen Road, Elizabeth Swift gets off the horse, gets violently sick. They go on to Rathcormac and they spend the night together. But during the night they have a little row because he's given her a beautiful gold watch in Fermoy. And in Rathcormac he asks for the watch back. It was a present for his wife. And he offers her £15 instead. And she refuses, but 6 days later he gets a knock on the door. There's a complaint of rape. Okay? Now, that's the first story that was told in court. The second story comes later on. Now, if a girl had a problem today, she would probably go to the guards. They would probably investigate. They would probably determine whether there was a case to answer and all sorts of things. In those days, there's no guards to investigate. If a girl wants to bring a charge of rape, she has to pay for the prosecution. She has to pay for the investigation. She has to pay for the court case. Okay? So very few cases go to court. In 150 years, there are 2 cases of rape where somebody is actually hanged. So it's very rare. So the girl would decide first of all what charge it would be against the man. The first one would be assault. Second is attempted, and the third is rape. Now, why is that important? Well, all crimes are divided into 2 categories. They're either clergyable or non-clergyable. If they were clergyable, that is, they could be heard in a clerical court, the death penalty is not on the table. Is that okay? If it's a non-clergy crime, the death penalty is on the table. Elizabeth Squibb charged him with a non-clergyable offence of rape. The court has 2 choices: free him or hang him. There's nothing in between. Nothing in between. Okay? So very few people went for that one. It's extremely rare. But Elizabeth Squibb did. Okay. The question is maybe where would she find all the funds for all this? We'll find out in a minute. Now, Henry Brown Hayes was actually, the man of Vernon Mount, was actually in court many years later for his crime. And the jury there recommended that they found him guilty, but found that he should not be hanged, and so he was transported, where he met a wonderful man called Captain Bligh of the Bounty. It's a great story, I mean, to follow it around. This guy is a nutcase of all kinds, but a wonderful story, if any of you feel like writing it up. Okay, so very few cases go to trial. Because invariably it was negotiation between the 2 sides. And we see that there's an offer of £15,000 sterling on the table to withdraw the case. Okay? Why would there be an offer on the table? We'll come to that in a moment because we have to understand a little bit about what the word rape actually meant. I mean, okay. First of all, there's no police force whatsoever. So what actually happens? What happens is, first of all, the girl brings her story to a grand jury. She pays for the convening of a grand jury. These are all judges. And their job is to look at whether in law there's a case to answer. They take, for example, you're caught speeding. You're caught speeding, yes or no. When you go to court later on, you might give an explanation as to why you were speeding, and your let's say, penalty might be mitigated. Can you follow that? So there are 2 stages. The first is the grand jury. Is there a case to answer? The second one is the actual trial proper. Okay, now, Cotter did not go to the grand jury trial. He didn't go. Could have, should have, didn't go. And this may be the accusation of arrogance towards him. His attitude was he did nothing wrong. He did not in any way rape the girl. He was totally and utterly innocent of that. He certainly had a relationship with her, but it certainly wasn't rape from his point of view. The difficulty is when it goes to trial, he can't challenge the evidence. The evidence has been accepted. Are you with me now? If you go to trial to answer your speeding charge, you've already accepted you've been caught speeding. You can't deny that. What you're giving is an explanation as to why you were speeding, and Cotter's explanation could be that she was drunk, she was willing, etc., etc., etc. The usual thing that a man will come up with in those days. Okay. Now, the procedure. There are no barristers in court. The judge decides the questions to ask. Okay? So, the whole court will take maybe 1 to 2 hours, start to finish. It's really like that. But normally, a pardon will be given. Like they might find the man technically guilty, but offer a pardon because, first of all, this is an all-male jury dealing with a man. But if he's a family man, if there's the slightest doubt, so think of it in terms of today now, if there was a capital case, a murder trial, if there's the slightest doubt, the defendant is entitled to the benefit of that doubt. Is there the slightest doubt in this case? And the jury's opinion, there was. Okay. Now, moving on. Elizabeth Squibb, when she arrives in Cork, she tells Edward Fenn she was scandalised. So immediately, Edward Fenn convenes the grand jury. And they found Cotter did not have a case to answer. There was nothing, he did nothing wrong. Now, in the Cotter papers, they suggest she then changed the story. And that at Carntierna she was pulled from her horse and ravished by James Cotter. Now, there's a slight inconsistency in the story because when she was getting sick in the first version, she told him to ride on to Rathcormac, she'd join him later on, as soon as she was fine, which she did. In the second version, she is ravished, she gets violently sick, but then there are 2 people hear her getting sick, they stop and ask her, is she alright? She said she's fine, just a few glasses of wine. She gets back on the horse with the servant and she follows James Cotter and spends the night with him. It's something slightly strange. Why would you do it if somebody had actually done that? So there's a second sitting of the grand jury. Now, Jonathan Swift says there were 3 sittings of the grand jury, but that would be enormously expensive. But there had to be at least 2, because in the first one, the Cotter papers, he does not have a case to answer, and then the story is changed. Okay, but that's the procedure taken. Now, you might wonder, were the Quakers involved? Well, Richard Harrison says they were accused of collusion in the result, and having connived at such a verdict as a result of their alleged Tory sympathies. There's no evidence in any Quaker minute book that the Quakers took any action at all. It's a very strong statement. Now, by the way, Quakers weren't Tories, they were Whigs, but leave that aside, there is actually, unfortunately, very strong evidence that they did take action. Okay, this is an ad placed by the Quakers in a Dublin newspaper. A lie that she was descended from an eminent Quaker family. The father, they said, was not a Quaker. The mother was married to not among the Quakers. We've recently, she was baptised in that communion in her infancy. She occasionally came to our meetings, but they did not have a 3-day meeting to discuss her innocence or guilt. Now, that's very strong, but it's a little bit like our friend Bill Clinton, that he did not have sexual relations with that woman. Because the mother was married to him accordingly. It doesn't actually answer. It gives an impression. But the mother certainly is from a very, very strong Quaker family. Okay. That's one of the ads. Now, in the Broderick papers, the judge believed that she was formerly one of the Quakers, but became a convert to give her testimony, because she couldn't otherwise swear. That's what he was told. Okay. St. Ledger says they spent a huge amount of money, and then in the Cotter papers they named Joseph Jobson, Edward Fenn. They were very active against Mr. Cotter. Money was to be had and was applied to forward the prosecution. So they're quite definitely, they're quite clear that the Quakers were involved. Here there's the offer of £1,500, and Cotter says he didn't make that offer, but he names Joshua Fennell and Edward Fenn as prosecutors of the case. So everybody, bar the Quakers, are saying that they were involved. Newspaper accounts, here is a report. Elizabeth's good for the rape of whom Mr. Cotter was executed, is come to the city. Being it as it will, here's a strange female Quaker, etc., etc., etc. This is the way she's described in the newspapers. You might find it difficult to read some of the script because the S's are the old in 1720, but that's the way it is. Okay. Missing evidence. Well, okay. In 21/11/1718, there was a meeting held by the Quakers in Cork. Now, you have to remember that 1718 meant 1719 because the year changed, the calendar changed to the Gregorian calendar in March of that year. So when they're talking about 2111, they're actually 1719, and the Quakers use a different month systems. Their year starts in March. Okay, it's a different calendar. So this is January. And in a minute they talk about the following frenzy preparation meeting here and under their consideration the base wicked barbarous usage done by Cotter upon Martha Squibb's daughter, carried away to a forest as she was riding on her journey to Cork. We have thought fit if there should be wanted money to answer the charge of solicitation. Now that the woman's going to be accused of being a prostitute. Okay, we will be answerable for saying. And it's signed. Now, this is what caught my interest again from a genealogical point of view. Who were these people? So, we have William Fennell, Thomas White, Joseph Hoare, Richard Pike. I picked out 4, okay, that I was able to get something on. Now, first of all, we have a book, A History of the Rise and Progress of the People called Quakers by Thomas White. This is the guy who was to record the sufferings of the Quakers. What kind of sufferings did they have? Well, during the Battle of the Boyne time, the Quaker meeting house was taken from them by the Governor of Cork. Who was the Governor of Cork? James Cotter. Okay, Joseph Pike. Richard Pike is the son of Richard Pike. Richard Pike was jailed in the Quaker meeting house. They turned into a jail, and he dies. They let him out in order to die. Joseph Fenn is the brother of Edward Fenn. He's won the parliamentary committee. He's involved in discipline. Joseph Hoare is known as a religious zealot. He went around sometimes naked, sometimes preaching, sometimes starving himself. A really strong, fascinating character. The Fennells lost a huge amount of land and goods. And Quakers lost around £100,000 during that time. And they blamed it on the the King James side. We also know that the Squibb estate of Castlegrace was confiscated. So suddenly we have a whole group of people who would be quite interested in maybe, let's call it something that's best served cold. Okay. Okay. Now trials. There are actually at least 5, but I think 6 because I believe John Swift was involved. First of all, we have the grand jury in Fermoy. Now the grand jury has 2 jobs. It says yes or no. If it's we don't know, they use the word ignoramus. It's all in Latin. If it's that yes, there's a case, they use the word bilivera. There is a case to answer. So there's at least one session of grand jury from White results ignoramus. Second story, probably not as well. And the third one then, yes, look, okay, he has a case to answer. He is then arrested and he's sent to Dublin to the Court of King's Bench. And there he applies for the trial to be transferred to Cork, which it is, but he's remanded in custody, the trial doesn't go ahead. He asks for bail, he's given bail, but he's not allowed out. Very strange. Because the person who gave him bail was the Lord Chief Justice. There were a couple of Lord Chief Justices, the one he dealt with, Lord Chief Justice Whitchett, granted him bail, he didn't get it. So finally, in February of 1720, the February Assizes, he is found guilty, but the jury unanimously asked that he not be hanged. And the judge says, no, you've got to hang this guy, which is kind of strange, but he does. But now the strange thing is, we have bits of the account from all sorts of people, but we can put them together, and they actually gel very, very well. Now, at this point, the Cotter papers, they tell us a little about the actual trial. The nature of the indictment of the crime alleged, the prisoner was a man of family, of fortune, and the jury should completely ignore this. And it talks about Elizabeth Squibb was a prosecutrix, and it tells us about the actual number of people who were involved. She produced 4 witnesses, herself and 3 others. We don't know who they are. But at least 2 of them have to be the 2 people who saw her getting sick. Herself was one, and one other person we don't know. James Cotter had all sorts of people, including the Sheriff of Cork, the landlady, all sorts of people who would swear that he was totally and utterly not wrong in the case of rape. It didn't matter. Okay, now Jonathan Swift. Why do I mention Jonathan Swift? Well, Jonathan Swift was obviously a very famous writer, but he got into a lot of trouble in Dublin. He wrote a number of letters that we call the Draper letters, and you can download these online. They're very interesting. He's one of these people who talks about burn everything English except the coal. He's the person who says we must protect Irish industry. He has a fascinating one about children. He says the Catholics, they're so poor, it's terrible altogether. And they're there waiting until they're 12 so they can join the army and the navy. Much better if the Catholics could sell their children when they're about a year old. I mean, a year-old child, it makes a wonderful meal. You could have boiled them, roasted them, stuffed them, and make a fabulous, lovely, delicate meal. And then if you gave them £5 a year, the way Catholics propagate, they would have children every single year, they'd have an income for life. It'd be great, sort out the problem straight away. A lot less Catholics in the country. Didn't like Catholics, but it's very biting, very, very biting stuff. But it's beautiful. I mean, it's really strong to read. But the strange thing is, he spends 4 months after the trial at the home of George Matthew. George Matthew is a cousin of Margaret Matthew. And in his writings he says the jury twice returned a not guilty verdict. Twice. And the judge ordered them back and saying, listen, are you refusing this because you think this woman is some sort of whore? But now when you think how rare that the rape trials are, it is incredibly specific because there's a second half to the letter in which he talks about the trial jury. And we look at it now. So in 1724 he writes to Lord Chief Justice Whitched, supposing upon information taken from your lordship of a rape committed, and the grand jury returned ignoramus on it, supposing a judge with more than decent passion should ask them their reasons, why are you not finding this woman guilty? And say to them, do you not think, are you refusing because you think this woman is a whore? My lord, you know I put not bare possibilities. It is generally believed these things have been done within an oak of this town. Now that's a very strong comment, and to me it has to apply to the case, because we can contrast that, and we will in a few minutes, with Swift's attitude to rape in 1711, some years before that. Okay, the second thing he says is that the people who were on the grand jury were then put on the trial jury. Shouldn't happen. It must be a totally new jury, totally fresh situation. They can't be socially, intellectually, they cannot be in the same class. They must be different people because they're going to hear the human side of the story. Are you with me on that? Okay. So that's the second half of that letter. And to me, it doesn't make sense in any way unless you think he's talking about the Cotter case. But, and by the way, from the Cotter papers we know the names of the jury. They were all the grand jury people. All of them. Okay, now, so if he does refer to the Cotter case, then the grand jury met 3 times. And the first time, Elizabeth Squibb was talking about being scandalised in Fermoy. Nothing happened in Fermoy. She was in a pub, she might have seen some indecent behaviour, but nothing happened to her in Fermoy. Okay. The second one, the story is different. She alleges rape, but the case is thrown out. And the third one then, the judge here. Now, here we have an interesting little thing because Lord Chief Justice Broderick wrote to juries to explain to them that the grand jury's function is not to decide whether the woman is innocent or guilty, or the man is innocent or guilty. It's to decide a case of law, whether in law there is a case to answer or not. That the trial jury later on will hear the human explanation. So, In the case of rape, there were 3 conditions. The first condition, the jury would be asked, by the way, did the girl get pregnant? If she got pregnant, it wasn't rape. Okay? This is an all-male jury, an all-male. Anyway, the reason is, by the way, that it's God's will. I'm sorry. It's God's will. It's meant to happen. So if she got pregnant, and this girl stated in court, she did not get pregnant after the rape. Now, the allegation is made by the Cotter side that she got pregnant. But if she said, I did not get pregnant after the rape, she's technically correct. Does that make sense? It doesn't actually say, it is correct. Because we have newspaper articles after us talking about the mental reservation used by Quakers in the trial. So the second thing is, did anybody hear her crying? Because she was meant to resist with all her might, and 2 people heard her. But she had got violently sick from the wine. And the question is, could she give consent? Well, if she was drunk, she can't give consent. If the 3 terms are met, there is a case to answer. Full stop. End of story. Okay. Now, in 1711, Swift wrote a letter to the Lord Chief Justice because there was a man about to be hanged for rape. And he just says, I helped to hinder a man of his pardon who was condemned for it. The Under Secretary was willing to save him upon an old notion that a woman cannot be ravished. I told the Secretary he could not pardon him without a favourable report from the judge. Anyway, he was a rogue. He deserved hanging. And it doesn't matter if they slept together 100 times. If she didn't give permission, it was rape. Full stop, hang him, get him out of the way. It's going to happen sometimes, so sooner the better. So that's Swift in 1711. Okay. But we have Beattie then, who's a major expert on law. He has a case, 1726, John Harris, charged with rape, acquitted by a jury who accepted the victim shared a bottle of wine with him after the event and spent most of the day in his company. And she had, they believe, concocted the story to explain her lateness to her husband. Now, the story, they read through the story and decided, look, it's not 100% to 0. There's something in this. Okay. Now, when the verdict is reached, now, today, if you have a jury trial, and we have a very prominent murder case at the moment, if there's a jury, you expect the jury to be impartial. The very first thing that happens, you have the one in Boston with the marathon, they spend months going through the jury to find people who are impartial. In 1720, they're expected to be partial. They're expected to be. They're expected to know the man, to know his form, to know is it likely to happen, should he be left off, is there anything at all in his favour. They're expected to advise the judge on what to do. The judge is expected to advise them on what decision to come to. There is no jury room. There is no separate place. They step out of the jury box, they gather around the foreman, and the foreman will say something like that. So you've all heard the judge, he reckons this guy is guilty. Are we all agreed? Okay, fine. Yes, sir, guilty as charged. End of story. There's no big deliberation. But judges were expected to use the word tenderness. That is, if there's any way at all that this man should not be hanged, please find it. They did not want the death penalty for something like this, especially if there was any doubt. And so in this case, when the jury recommends that Cotter is not going to be hanged, or shouldn't be hanged, the judge gives a 6 weeks reprieve. Now, 6 weeks reprieves were extremely rare. If you remember King Charles, he was executed, well, it was the day after the trial. Monday he's on trial, Tuesday he's executed, like that. No appeals, it gets all the public up and the heat up. So, they left the decision to the Secretary of State. Lord Lefton was actually over in England at the time, but they had particular criteria for looking for at appeals, and anybody who had a political background, no hope whatsoever. Cotter had a strong political background. Okay. The Lord Chief Justice Alan Broderick, he just reckoned that the judge, his son, rushed to judgment. He was too fast. And he says, I can't see any reason why this man should not be pardoned. His letter is even more telling, because he says that Cotter was accused of political activity, but he was involved in nothing from 1713 on. So for the last 7 years of his life, there is no political activity. There's amorous activity, but no political activity. Okay, why is that important? Well, how do we know? Well, Broderick has all his letters intercepted. He's been watched all the time because of prior history. But for the last 7 years, there is no evidence whatsoever of any political activity. So, he says that the Quakers joined the application. She was formerly one of them, became a convert to give her testimony. The woman herself had applied on his behalf, ought to have received sufficient satisfaction for the injury done her. So everybody wants this man let off. But it doesn't happen. So the execution itself was botched. Now, for those of you familiar with these things, the length of the rope is really important. If it's too short, the person is strangling slowly. If it's too long, between the weight of the body, when you give the snap, the head will come off. This is what happened. Okay. Now, the night before the execution, the mob tore down the gallows, and while that was going on, there was an attempt at an escape. 2 ladies brought along a third outfit, and 3 ladies attempted to escape from the prison. But the jailer was able to count more than 2, and anyway, he was arrested, brought back in, and his fence is now locked up. The strange thing about the execution, Jonathan Swift writes a poem about a botched execution, which is really strange. And he writes another lovely poem about the man going to his execution. We'll come to that in a moment. He got a massive funeral. There was a cortege over 2 miles long, and he was buried at midnight, which was the custom of the time. Now, he was alleged to have made a gallows speech. Gallows speeches were usually written by professional people as a lesson to young people. So, I mean not here to make a long speech. For what I have to say, I have faithfully delivered already to my ghostly father. But the greatest concern I take to heart in the fact I have committed is that I designedly made the woman drunk in order to have my desire. I humbly beg, good people, that you will assist me in prayer during this moment of my expiring life, that the Lord may receive my soul. Now, what is very strange about that is that in the Jonathan Swift poem about an execution of a young gentleman, the young gentleman shouts out, "It's all a lie." He's not making a gallows speech. And if there was a gallows speech, we can see from his will, the night before he writes his will, it's a different language. Okay. This is the Swift poem about this young gentleman who loved white. His waistcoat and stockings and breeches were white. His cap had a new cherry ribbon tight. The maids to the doors of the balconies ran and said, "Lack a day, he's a proper young man." But as from the windows the ladies he spied, like a bow in the box he bowed low on each side. And when his last speech the hawkers did cry, he swore from his cart, "It's all a damn lie. My conscience is clear, my spirits are calm, and thus I go off without prayer book or psalm." Now that's Swift's poem. Is it referring, I can't tell you it's referring to the execution, but to me it's very close to it. This is Carrigtwohill today. The building over here is the girls' school in Carrigtwohill. Do you know the building I'm talking about? St. Aloysius in Carrigtwohill? And the old churchyard is here, and up on the wall, now there was an actual tomb, but as the church was getting, the roof came off, and they moved the thing up here to memorial stone up to the wall of the church where it is today. But in his will he has, "I pray and beg to be buried privately, and by night, and tomorrow night I mean." It's a simple language. But he was hanged. And strange things happened then. The law of the land was the children had to be taken from the mother and raised as Protestants. So our 2 boys were taken from the mother. They become Protestants. The one of them becomes an MP for Askew in County Limerick. Margaret Matthew herself changes religion. She remarries. Everybody involved in the story got frightened. A number of the Plunkett family changed religion. Richard Burke changed religion. He became a Protestant. He actually sent his son to a Quaker school. But the Matthew family then, or the Cotter family, began to disintegrate slightly. Then they went to West Cork. Again, there's a curious anecdote there in West Cork. For some reason, they lived around Inchigeelagh, and they became called the Woodsmen. So, if you are a genealogist, you'll find a lot of Sylvester Cotters in West Cork. It dates from this time. You won't find it beforehand. It just refers to a background they would have. But a lot of the people were absolutely frightened by this particular episode. But Cotter McBride, he was a challenge to Protestant ascendancy that could not be ignored. And so the poor man died. Okay? Now, how are we doing? We're doing fine. What I'll do is, if there are any questions on it, I'd be delighted to take any questions if anybody has any questions on it. Okay? And we'll be there. There's nothing more you could do here for a few weeks if you were to go to this.
You were saying there that those people saying it was one of the most important trials in
Yes.
England.
Why?
I mean,
Why is it?
yeah, it's
Okay. For all sorts of reasons. What is astonishing about this is that it's the first time the entire Protestant community in Ireland are totally aware that they're completely at the mercy of the English government in England. That no matter where they were born or what they were doing, they were second-class citizens once they were in Ireland. And to me and other people, we see this as the beginning of Irish nationalism. It's the very first time. There are a number of other trials that happen that are judicial trials, where important people are taken out, if you like, to use a modern expression, but the entire community, Catholic and Protestant, the entire Irish nation sees that their future. I mean, if you take the penal laws, the law to castrate clergy, the law to prevent the growth of popery. I mean, one of these laws, which was that if a Catholic man died, his children had to be taken from the mother. If one of those children became a Protestant, he got to keep the entire estate. Okay? If not, the land had to be divided equally among the sons. Now, go on 3-4 generations of dividing and subdividing and subdividing, and suddenly you have Catholics becoming incredibly poor because the farms are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and suddenly we have the Great Famine. It's literally a complete public attempt to destroy the Catholic nation of Ireland. But the Protestant nation, they were leaving in droves because they couldn't conduct their business, simply because they were living in Ireland, and Irish business would destroy English business. So that's why it becomes so significant. There's no other, well, also there's no other big trial anyway at the time, but it's a hugely significant trial for that reason.